William the Silent, or as he is better known in the Netherlands, William of Orange, was the father of Dutch independence, but he started as a loyal subject of the Hapsburg family he fought against, and went from a dutiful subject of theirs to a rebellious thorn in their side and an influential and strong leader against them. This video looks at his journey from faithful servant of the Hapsburg Empire to rebellious leader of Dutch independence. On April the 24th, 1533, William was born at Dillenburg Castle in the Holy Roman Empire, in what is now modern-day Germany. He was the eldest son of Count William I of Nassau-Siegen and Juliana of Stolberg, a noblewoman known for her piety and strong moral influence on her children. The House of Nassau was a powerful noble family, with vast lands in Germany and the Low Countries, but at birth William was not expected to inherit anything beyond his father's German estates. Everything changed when his cousin, René of Chalon, the Prince of Orange, died childless in 1544. René, who was closely aligned with the Hapsburgs, had been a loyal vassal to Emperor Charles V, ruler of the Holy Roman Empire and King of Spain. In his will, René left all of his territories and titles to William, on one condition: he had to be raised Catholic instead of Lutheran and serve the Habsburg crown. This was no small inheritance. At the age of 11, William suddenly became ruler of the Principality of Orange, a small but strategically important territory in southern France, as well as vast lands in the Netherlands and Germany. This made him one of the most influential noblemen in the Habsburg Empire. However, it also meant he had to leave behind his Lutheran upbringing and his family in Dillenburg to be raised in the imperial court. William was sent to Brussels, where he was placed under the personal guardianship of Mary of Hungary, the sister of Charles V and governor of the Habsburg Netherlands. At court, William learned from some of the most brilliant political and military minds of the age. He was trained in diplomacy, statecraft, military strategy, and law, gaining first-hand insight into the complex workings of the Habsburg Empire. He also became fluent in multiple languages, including German, Dutch, French, Spanish, and Latin, a rare skill that made him a highly adaptable political player. This exposure to different cultures, ideologies, and court politics helped shape his later policies of tolerance. Unlike many of his contemporaries, William was not dogmatic in religious matters, a trait that would later make him stand out as a leader in the Dutch revolt. In 1551, at the age of 18, William married Anna von Egmond, a wealthy and well-connected Dutch noblewoman. As the only child of Maximilian von Egmond, one of the richest and most influential nobles in the Netherlands, Anna brought with her vast estates and significant political influence. This marriage firmly rooted William in Dutch society, giving him a personal stake in the region's affairs beyond his official Spanish-appointed titles. Although their marriage was likely arranged for political and financial reasons, historical records suggest that William and Anna shared genuine affection. Together they had 3 children. By all accounts, William was a devoted husband and father. As a young noble, William quickly gained favour at court. His intelligence, charm, and diplomatic skill impressed Charles, who took him under his wing. By 1555, William had already gained a strong reputation within the Habsburg court. His close association with the emperor had allowed him to rise rapidly in influence, earning him trust and political appointments. However, this was also the year that would dramatically reshape his world, as Charles, suffering from ill health, abdicated his vast empire. The emperor trusted William so much that at just 22 years old, he allowed him to serve as one of the negotiators for his abdication, when control of the Spanish Netherlands was handed to his son, Philip II of Spain. At this stage, William was still a loyal Habsburg subject, seen as a rising star within the empire. However, his time in Brussels also exposed him to the increasing tensions in the Low Countries, where resentment was growing against Spanish rule and religious persecution. Though he outwardly remained obedient to the Spanish crown, he was already beginning to question the path his rulers were taking. Charles divided his dominions between his son Philip II of Spain and his brother Ferdinand I, who became Holy Roman Emperor. The Netherlands and Spain, including its vast overseas empire, went to Philip II, a deeply Catholic and authoritarian ruler with a very different style of governance from his father. Unlike the pragmatic and worldly Charles, Philip II was rigidly pious, deeply distrustful, and unwilling to delegate power. He saw religious unity under Catholicism as the cornerstone of his rule, and from the moment he took the throne, he sought to centralize authority in Spain, reducing the traditional autonomy of the Netherlands and its nobility. William at this time was still an important and trusted member of the elite, but he quickly began to observe concerning changes under Philip's rule. Philip II recognized William's intelligence and influence in the Low Countries, and in 1559 he appointed him stadtholder or governor of Holland, Zeeland, and Utrecht. This was a prestigious and powerful position, making William responsible for maintaining order, overseeing law and governance, and protecting Spanish interests in the Netherlands. At this stage, William remained outwardly loyal to Spain. He carried out Philip's orders, attended royal functions, and played the role of an obedient noble. However, behind the scenes, he was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with Philip's policies, particularly the growing suppression of Protestantism and the increasing military presence in the Netherlands. Tragically, a year before this, his first wife Anna died in 1558, leaving William a widower at just 25 years old. Despite the loss, he retained the Dutch lands and connections he had gained through his marriage, further cementing his influence in the Netherlands. This attachment to the region would later prove critical when he took up arms against Spanish rule. As William solidified his position in the Netherlands, Philip II's rule became increasingly authoritarian. Philip was deeply concerned about the spread of Protestantism in the Low Countries, particularly Calvinism, which was gaining a strong foothold among the Dutch population. To combat this, he intensified the Inquisition, an institution designed to identify, punish, and eliminate so-called heretics. In the early 1560s, Spanish authorities began executing Protestants in public, often in horrific fashion, as a warning to others. During this time of rising tension, William remarried in 1561 to Anna of Saxony, the daughter of Maurice, Elector of Saxony. This was a politically strategic match, strengthening his connections to the Lutheran rulers of the Holy Roman Empire. Though their marriage initially had advantages, it quickly became deeply unhappy. Anna suffered from mental instability, and their relationship became strained by financial troubles and personal conflicts. Over time, she began exhibiting erratic behavior, alienating William and the Dutch nobility. By the late 1560s, as William's political battles against Spain intensified, his marriage completely collapsed. Anna had an affair with one of William's courtiers, which led to her being publicly disgraced, imprisoned, and later disowned by her own family and William. This personal turmoil added yet another layer of difficulty to William's increasingly precarious position as he prepared to openly rebel against Spain. One of the defining moments in William's transformation from loyal noble to rebel leader came in 1565 at the Conference of Bayonne, a secret meeting between Philip II and his staunch Catholic ally, Catherine de' Medici. William was invited as a Spanish representative, and while there, he overheard a private conversation between Philip II and Catherine, in which they apparently openly discussed their plans for religious persecution. According to William's later accounts, Philip explicitly laid out his intentions to completely eradicate Protestantism in the Netherlands, using force if necessary. At that moment, William made a conscious decision. He could not, in good conscience, support the widespread persecution of religious minorities, could no longer trust Philip II's governance of the Netherlands, and that he would only outwardly maintain his loyalty, for now, but begin working against Spanish rule. There are some sources that suggest this event earned him the nickname William the Silent, not because he was naturally quiet, but because he kept his thoughts and plans to himself, carefully hiding his true intentions while he waited for the right moment to act. However, his nickname could also have stemmed from his cautious political maneuvering, rather than just a single event. The first major public act of defiance against Spanish rule came in that same year with the iconoclastic fury. Across the Netherlands, Protestant mobs stormed Catholic churches, smashing statues, destroying stained glass windows, and ransacking monasteries. The movement was fueled by deep resentment towards Philip's suppression of Protestantism and high taxation, which had left many towns struggling economically. William, like many noblemen, did not directly encourage the destruction, but sympathized with the grievances that caused it. He attempted to mediate, urging Spanish authorities and, more directly, Philip himself to adopt a more moderate stance. However, Philip saw this as outright rebellion and responded with brutal repression. Enraged by the Protestant uprisings, Philip dispatched the Duke of Alba, one of his most ruthless generals, to crush the rebellion by any means necessary. Alba arrived in August 1567 at the head of 10,000 Spanish troops, with a mandate to restore order through terror. His first act was to establish the Council of Troubles, quickly dubbed the Council of Blood, which executed thousands of Dutch citizens accused of heresy or rebellion. Even high-ranking nobles were not spared. Two prominent Dutch leaders, the Counts of Egmont and Hoorn, were arrested and publicly executed in Brussels' main square. Realizing that his life was in immediate danger, William fled the Netherlands and sought refuge in Germany. There, he began preparing for armed resistance, determined to fight for the Netherlands' autonomy. From exile, William began raising an army, using his vast wealth and connections to recruit Protestant mercenaries from Germany and France. He called upon the support of disaffected nobles and towns eager for self-rule, presenting himself not only as a defender of Protestantism, but as a leader for all Dutch people who opposed Spanish tyranny. In April 1568, William launched his first military campaign, marking the official start of the 80 Years' War. His troops, led by his brother Louis of Nassau, won a key victory at the Battle of Heiligerlee, defeating a Spanish force and briefly gaining control of a northern province. However, Spanish retaliation was swift. Alba crushed William's army in a series of battles, forcing him to retreat once again. Despite these early defeats, William's cause continued to gain traction. He was no longer just a noble resisting Spanish power, he was becoming a symbol of Dutch resistance. By 1569, William had realized that conventional military campaigns alone would not be enough to defeat Spain's overwhelming forces. Instead, he turned to guerrilla warfare and naval attacks, supporting the watergeuzen, or sea beggars, bands of Dutch privateers who raided Spanish-held ports along the coast. In 1572, the sea beggars captured the town of Brielle, a major turning point in the revolt. Other towns across the Netherlands, inspired by this victory, began openly rebelling against Spanish rule. William returned to the Netherlands, and for the first time he had a strong foothold. Though the Spanish remained powerful, the Dutch had begun to rally behind him as their leader, and the dream of an independent Netherlands was no longer impossible. After the Brielle victory, other towns across Holland and Zeeland rose in rebellion. Recognizing William as their leader, the rebel provinces formally appointed him Stadtholder of Holland and Zeeland in that same year. Unlike previous leaders who sought religious domination, William championed religious tolerance, seeking to unite Catholics, Lutherans, and Calvinists under a common cause. This position put him at odds with radical Calvinist factions who sought to impose Protestant rule. Despite these tensions, William's leadership brought order and direction to the rebellion, allowing the northern provinces to organize politically and militarily. The Spanish military response was swift and brutal. In 1574, the Spanish laid siege to Leiden, a key rebel stronghold. William played a pivotal role in orchestrating the city's relief, famously flooding the surrounding lands by breaking the dikes, forcing the Spanish to withdraw. This victory was celebrated as a defining moment of Dutch resistance. However, internal divisions between Protestant and Catholic factions threatened the unity of the rebel provinces. By 1576, Spain's brutal repression had alienated even moderate Catholic provinces, leading to the pacification of Ghent, a temporary agreement uniting all 17 provinces of the Netherlands against Spanish rule. However, this fragile unity soon collapsed due to religious tensions. Amid the turmoil, William married for a third time in 1575, this time to Charlotte of Bourbon, a French Protestant noblewoman who was well liked by the populace. Unlike his previous marriages, this was based on both political strategy and genuine affection. Charlotte was a former nun who had renounced Catholicism and fled France due to the French Wars of Religion. Their marriage strengthened Dutch ties to France, which William hoped to use against Spain. She became a loyal partner, offering both moral support and practical assistance, even acting as his unofficial secretary. Their relationship was remarkably affectionate for the time, and Charlotte stood by William through the most difficult years of the rebellion. Sadly, her health would decline after giving birth to their sixth child, and she died in 1582, leaving William devastated. By 1579, religious tensions had fully fractured the Netherlands. The southern provinces, which were predominantly Catholic, signed the Union of Arras, reconciling with Spain. In response, William helped form the Union of Utrecht on January 23, 1579, uniting the northern, mostly Protestant provinces in continued resistance against Spain. This agreement laid the foundation for what would eventually become the independent Dutch Republic. However, William's ideal of religious tolerance was increasingly at odds with the growing influence of hardline Calvinists, who sought a Protestant state rather than a pluralistic one. Despite this, he remained committed to securing Dutch independence, believing that unity was essential to survival. William recognized that if the northern provinces were to survive, they needed to formally break away from Spanish rule and establish a new political structure. Therefore, on July 26, 1581, the Act of Abjuration was signed, marking one of the most significant moments in Dutch history. The Act of Abjuration was essentially the Dutch Declaration of Independence. The document rejected Philip II as the rightful ruler of the northern provinces, stating that a sovereign must rule for the benefit of his people, and that if a ruler becomes a tyrant and oppresses his subjects, they have the right to remove him, a radical idea in an era of absolute monarchy. The Act formally proclaimed that the northern provinces no longer recognized Philip II's authority. Although not yet a declaration of full nationhood, this marked the first legal step toward what would later become the Dutch Republic. William was the primary architect of the Act. His belief in religious tolerance and self-governance had shaped the Dutch Revolt, and the Act of Abjuration reflected many of his political ideals. William's writings emphasized the responsibility of rulers to serve their people, not rule through fear and repression. He drew upon legal precedents from medieval contracts between lords and vassals, arguing that Philip had violated his duties as king and had therefore forfeited his rule. However, the Dutch provinces were divided on what should replace Spanish rule. Some wanted a constitutional monarchy, while others sought a republican system. William initially tried to find a new foreign ruler to strengthen Dutch legitimacy. Francis, the Duke of Anjou, was briefly invited to be the new sovereign, but his disastrous rule ended in 1583 when he attempted a coup against the Dutch cities and fled. With no clear alternative, William was left as the de facto leader, but the Dutch still hesitated to officially declare a republic. Ultimately, the Act of Abjuration was a groundbreaking political statement, but it did not immediately secure Dutch independence. Philip II refused to recognize the Act and continued to send armies to crush the rebellion. The Catholic provinces of the south, around modern-day Belgium, remained loyal to Spain, forming the Union of Arras, and while England and France sympathized with the Dutch cause, neither was willing to fully recognize their independence just yet. Despite its immediate struggles, the Act of Abjuration laid the groundwork for what would come later. The principles it outlined, that rulers must serve their people and that sovereignty derives from the governed rather than divine right, may have influenced political thinkers like John Locke and the American Declaration of Independence nearly 200 years later. Though the Dutch Republic was not officially established until 1588, the Act of Abjuration represented a fundamental shift in European politics, demonstrating that people could reject a monarch's authority and govern themselves. For William, however, the Act was both his greatest achievement and his death sentence. His dream of a free and united Netherlands was starting to take shape, but his enemies would stop at nothing to silence him. In March 1580, Philip II had issued the ban against William, a public declaration that William was a traitor and a heretic. The decree offered 25,000 crowns, a fortune at the time, to anyone who would kill William. Philip personally justified the assassination order, calling William the greatest enemy of the human race, and declaring that his murder would be an act of divine justice. This was unprecedented. Never before had a European monarch openly placed a bounty on the head of a ruling nobleman. Despite this, William refused to back down. In response to the edict, he published his famous Apology, an open letter denouncing Philip II as a tyrant who had betrayed the people of the Netherlands. However, the bounty had placed a target on his back, and would-be assassins soon lined up to collect the reward. Over the next few years, multiple attempts were made to kill William, all of them unsuccessful. Some of the would-be assassins were caught before they could act, while others failed in their tasks. One attempt came from Jean Jauregui, a Catholic fanatic who shot William in March 1582 in Antwerp. The bullet grazed William's neck and jaw, but he survived after a difficult recovery. In 1583, William had married for the fourth and final time to Louise de Coligny, a French Huguenot noblewoman. Like William, Louise had suffered personal loss due to religious persecution. Her father, Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, had been murdered during the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572. Therefore, their marriage was both a political alliance and a personal partnership, as Louise shared William's vision of religious tolerance. Together, they had one son, Frederick Henry, who would later become Stadtholder of the Dutch Republic and continue his father's legacy. Despite the risks, William continued his work as Stadtholder and leader of the Dutch revolt. He moved to Delft, which had become a center of resistance against Spanish rule. But in 1584, an assassin would finally succeed. On July 10, 1584, William was in Prinsenhof, Delft, his residence at the time. That day, a young Burgundian Catholic named Balthasar Gerard approached William, posing as a supporter. Gerard was a fanatical Catholic who believed he was carrying out a holy mission by killing William. He gained access to William's household, pretending to be a loyalist seeking employment. Once inside, he waited for his moment to strike. That evening, as William descended the main staircase, Gerard stepped forward and shot him at close range, 3 times in the chest and side. William collapsed immediately. Servants and guards rushed to his aid, but his wounds were too severe. As he lay dying, William murmured his final words, "My God, have pity on my soul and on this poor people." These words encapsulated his entire life's work, his belief in justice, his fight for religious tolerance, and his love for the Dutch people. Gerard attempted to flee, but was quickly caught and arrested. His fate was brutal. He was tortured and interrogated for days. Finally, on July 14th, 1584, he was executed in one of the most gruesome ways possible. His right hand was burned off with a red-hot iron, his flesh was torn off with pincers, he was disemboweled alive, and his heart was ripped out and thrown in his face, until finally, he was quartered and beheaded. This was seen as one of the most extreme executions in European history. at that time, and it shows the vehemence and raw feelings behind it that transcended politics. Despite the horrific execution, Philip II paid Gerard's family the promised bounty and even granted them a noble title. Gerard was seen by Spanish loyalists as a martyr for the Catholic cause, although no Spanish officials endorsed the crime. William's assassination was a massive blow to the Dutch cause, but it did not end the revolt. His death elevated him to martyr status among the Dutch, inspiring even greater resistance against Spanish rule. Leadership of the rebellion passed to his son Maurice of Nassau, who would continue his father's fight and ultimately secure Dutch independence. The provinces remained leaderless for a time, but by 1588, they officially formed the Dutch Republic, the first successful breakaway from Hapsburg rule. William's leadership during the Dutch Revolt laid the foundation for what would become the Dutch Republic, officially recognized in 1648 with the Treaty of Münster. His ability to unite factions and navigate political complexities ensured that the Netherlands emerged as an independent and resilient state, free from Spanish rule. Though William did not live to see Dutch independence, the House of Orange remained at the heart of Dutch leadership. His son Maurice continued the fight, while his youngest son, Frederick Henry, further solidified the power of the Dutch Republic. Over time, the House of Orange-Nassau evolved into the Dutch royal family, which still exists today, making William the Silent the symbolic father of the modern Netherlands. Unlike many leaders of his era, William sought to bridge religious divides rather than deepen them. Though a Protestant himself, he advocated for a policy of religious freedom, believing that peace could only be achieved if Catholics and Protestants coexisted. This principle deeply influenced Dutch governance, helping to shape the Netherlands into one of the most religiously tolerant and pluralistic societies in Europe, a legacy that continues today. And William's impact was so profound that the Dutch national anthem, Wilhelmus, is dedicated to him. The song, written during his lifetime, portrays him as a steadfast and humble leader who remained devoted to both his people and his cause, although it wasn't adopted as a national anthem until centuries later. It is one of the oldest national anthems in the world still in use today. William the Silent was more than just a military leader. He was a visionary, a strategist, and a champion of self-governance. He fought not just for independence, but for the principles of freedom, tolerance, and unity. Though his life was cut short, the rebellion he led did not die with him. The Dutch continued their struggle, inspired by the foundations he had laid. Today, his legacy endures in every Dutch citizen who values democracy, resilience, and the right to determine their own future. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any new documentaries.